Hi Viraj, welcome here. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you, Rajit. Always a pleasure.
So today, what we are going to do here is, I'm going to ask you a few things about, the entire ecosystem, your experience. You've been with the entire banking fraternity and the consultancy domain and AI for a long time right now. And, today I have always been personally been, amazed at certain things that I've always learned from you. So today I'm going to, try and share some of it with our viewers and take your thoughts on some of the trends that's happening. So that's broadly the agenda for the talk today. Before I start, I think the first piece that comes to my mind is, every time I'm opening a newspaper these days, I see the word mule account. I see the word fraud. If I look at even a Google search today, anywhere I write fraud, there are 10 articles that comes up in the last 10 minutes that has come up in that article. My first thought when I see that as a user is, as we look at digitization, digital public infrastructure emerging, constant smartphone user, I feel scared as a user that, what are we really getting into? Are we really safe? Today, as someone who, is an advocate of AI, is an advocate of technology, what's your thought on something like fraud? Do you think that it's really a very emerging problem and that problem can actually be a deterrent to the growth of technology in India? What's your thought on when you see the word fraud today? Let's start there.
The minute you say something like fraud, the first thing that comes to my mind is my mother and my father, right? I'll tell you why. So my dad received an SMS the other day, and he was told on the SMS that unless you go click on this link, your bank account will be shut. Now, he's been a banker all his life. So he was quite surprised that, something like this has actually happened to him. So he's like, why would they shut down a bank account I've had for the past 60 years, right? But then he's like, before I clicked on it, he remembered me because I'm from this industry and he gave me a call. He said, what's happening right now? I just got this SMS in the morning. Sure, what do I do with it? I said, don't do anything at all, right? And the first thing I did was told him to go to his bank or call his banker and tell him that this has happened. Now, my father is fortunate because I'm not saying he called me. He's just fortunate because he used his head, right? And he doubted this strange message that came to him at 7 in the morning. But there are so many people in India who are falling prey to this every day, day in and day out. And it's unfortunate. So what to me, digital is great, scaling is great digitally, but the problem is that there's not enough education, there are not enough rail guards, especially for end customers. And from a banking standpoint, that can be a huge opportunity. It can be a huge, you can say, downside as well, because all it takes is 5 or 10 cases, a few crore rupees missing from your bank account, and that's it. You lose trust in a banking system, which is considered to be, by the way, one of the most fortified, globally, the Indian banking system. So for me, right now, there's a huge opportunity for AI to actually step in and correct some of these pitfalls. Now, at the same time, when I say AI, I also take into consideration the fact that you've got things like ChatGPT, you've got things like LLMs out there, and you have the ability to even mimic people's voices, mimic people's faces, and all sorts of things. So I think AI not only has a responsibility to be able to take care of some of these earlier issues that we spoke of, right, for the elderly and the people who may not be as technologically savvy, but at the same time, AI should be responsible in making sure that LLMs and some of these capabilities of Gen AI are deployed responsibly. I think that's where, entrepreneurs and companies in general are going to shine if they can make that difference.
I think lovely point, and that opens up a box of questions in my head. But let me start with the instance you talked about, right? I myself, coming from the technology world, I have been a victim of a phone call like this, and it happened on a Sunday 8 a.m. and I woke up and I was off guard. And so I completely understand that how targeted this can be and how personal this can be. My only thought on this is, and it's again going back to the same topic, right? You talked about responsible AI and how it can happen, but the reality is that the world we are going into technology is very much available with people, and it's going to be, right? It's going to be available at the click of a button, at the click of a swipe. It's right there. And if we think, and since on the other hand we have been looking at some of these things, what I'm constantly noticing is that the age group that is behind this fraud is constantly been late 20s and mid 20s, and which essentially means it's a very tech savvy, uh, smarter population out there, which is behind this, and they're also linked with it. So when you say AI can be more responsible or companies can be more responsible, my reality is that we are living in a world where Google is accessible to everyone. Tomorrow, OpenAI will be accessible to anyone. Already is. Uh, how much of guardrails is actually possible? And what would you think that what are the major reasons behind where we are today on this topic today?
I think it's a function of the industry maturing and laws maturing with it. If you think about it, right now it's the Wild West, right? With Gen AI, you're correct that everybody can get their hands on this for as little as, say, a few $100 a month, right? And with the computing power that resides on our phones and some of these Gen AI enabled laptops and devices that are coming, you're right that anybody can exploit it to their advantage. But I think it's only a matter of time. If you already see in Europe, in the US, in India, there's a huge wave where the the government is working with the industry to actually define governance norms, norms in terms of, like, what will constitute safe usage of this technology. The good thing is that people are aware that this can be exploited for all sorts of negative behavior and impact, but the laws are coming up quick enough. I think unlike last 20 years, wherein it took a long time for governance and legalities to catch up with technology, uh, the good thing is now things are catching up a lot faster, and governments also understand that they have to adapt it a lot faster. So one thing is the legal framework around this is going to get a lot more solid over the coming few months and years. The second is, I think, in terms of responsible usage, there will always be thieves, right? There will always be people who are going to exploit it to their own benefit. I think caveat emptor, right? The classical concept. I think as things get more digitized, as we start living more in a AI driven world, I think it's important that education plays a huge part in this. And when I say education, like, I remember in the current firm in the last firm that I was working at, we used to have this event that where we used to actually go to schools and educate them in terms of cybersecurity. And we used to go to schools and educate children. And I'm talking about classes third, fourth, and above. And we used to educate them in terms of what is safe usage, right, of technology. What does cyberbullying mean? How do you react to it? Stuff like that. So I think the same thing will have to be imparted from in schools now with respect to Gen AI and AI in general. That considering AI is going to be such a fundamental piece of what we do every day, it'll have to start at the grassroots. It'll have to start in school. It'll have to start in primary, where kids are actually educated in terms of what does safe usage mean. What do you mean by actually using this technology for your and social benefit, right? So I think it's got education as a prong. Two, it's got governance as a prong, and more than anything else, I think there will have to be ways by which companies that create this technology start taking ownership and accountability. That we are not just here to create a technology that can be cut loose. I think they will also have to play a very, very important role as part of this triangle that actually enables this safety to come through to society.
I think financial literacy and education is a very important point you brought out, and I'll deep dive into that. But before I go there, one more point. I think you've talked about AI in large. One more thing that I feel, and correct me, I feel in the last 5 years, India has gone through a massive surge of digital public infrastructure, which essentially means a lot of the data about each of us have been digitized, and is available on cloud for various purposes. What is consistently again happening is that some of these are getting leaked in the public domain. If you actually go into some of the root of these scams or these frauds, somewhere there is a collusion between database operators on the ground, etc. That's out there. Somewhere that brings up the entire question of safety and security of digital public infrastructure. uh, it's a ongoing topic. It's an ongoing process, I understand, but from where we are, how would you look at today's condition of the digital public infrastructure? You talked about banking in India, but if I talk about DPI in India vis-a-vis that outside, where are we today and what can we do better?
I think yes, I mean there have been incidents of leakage of data. There have been incidents of bad stewardship or questionable stewardship of that data. Maybe even fiduciary responsibility of that data, and maybe somewhere there have been gaps. But I think by and large, I think the DPI that India has created is unlike any other. I've lived abroad. I've lived in countries outside of India, countries that are far more modernized, far more automated, far more richer. But uh, the digital public infrastructure that I see in our country, I think, is second to none. I think Aadhaar, DigiLocker, I think all the initiatives that the government is doing right now, I think they are phenomenal. I think India is like this infrastructure. If you were to look at the infrastructure growth in India in terms of highways, I think faster than that has been the growth of the DPI infrastructure, right? So we've got data running much faster than the cars that are going to be able to run in this country at maybe 100 kilometers an hour across the board. So, agreed, there have been challenges, but I think the DPI success story in India is unparalleled. I don't think, and I think that is a marvelous opportunity, right? That is a marvelous opportunity for companies everywhere to actually benefit from this. You could be creating tech for agriculture. You could be creating tech for banking. You could be creating tech for infra. You could be creating tech for anybody. You could be creating a business for anybody. But I think it just opens up this whole capability set for people to exploit. So I think the way to look at DPI should be how do you make it more secure, right? Because it's only going to grow. Be it, right now we're looking at it from a KYC perspective, or you're looking at it from a perspective of, your own identity, Aadhaar, etc. Tomorrow it's going to be digital records. It's going to be banking records. It's going to be records around academics. It's going to be records around land. All of this is going to come together to create this massive data infrastructure base. And what we really need around this is very strong governance, very strong audit mechanisms, and a very strong commitment by the government to actually keep it safe. I think one of the things about keeping the data within the country is a huge step forward, because I think not only then will your infrastructure grow, your data will be protected and it will stay within the country. Second, I think the sheer investments that the government is making in terms of, not only digitizing but also securing this data, right? And working with private industry partners to make that better. That is going to unleash the next level of capabilities for our country. So, in a nutshell, to answer your question, I think DPI is a boon for us. Yes, there are problems, some problems, but I think those are fixable. I think the way to look at it right now is how do you leverage this DPI and this growing infrastructure to benefit the country in general?
I think just to add on that, right, and you talked about DPI for growth, right, and that is how every enterprise in India has been looking at it. And I think the fact of the matter is that the ecosystem also has been growing. Uh, One of the thoughts that has been coming to people and the ecosystem is that as the regulator comes in, the governing bodies come in and they try to put curbs and boundaries and guardrails, the entire thought of growth also gets limited. As we've seen a lot of companies getting impacted by regulations, we've seen a lot of businesses shutting down due to regulations. I think one of the challenges that comes in when we are looking at growth is also how do you de-risk the growth. You have worked in some of the largest consultancy firms in the world, and we have been working as a part of it across multiple large scale enterprises. When you interact with leaders there, when as people aspire to grow, you know what is the element of de-risking that can come in? How can you grow sustainably? How can you grow within the curbs and boundaries? What would your take be? Is it even possible?
Um, See, I mean, when you, the first thing to answer your question, whenever I meet leaders in industry right now, there's a sense of optimism. There's a sense of elation. There's a sense that, as a country, India, it's growing. It has the capability to be, whatever it wants to be in the next 20, 30, 40 years. So there is a large amount of optimism that is there. And that also is with the private industry and the public industry. And to be honest, right now, let's take Gen AI. If you speak to any CXO right now, the minute they see that capability, they say, yes, I know this has the ability to transform my customer experience. This has the ability to transform the way we actually do business. This has the ability to transform even things at my manufacturing and production levels in my factory. But so there is a sense of optimism around Gen AI. But when it comes to adoption of Gen AI, they are very careful, right? They will start with a prototype, or they will say, let's do some controlled POCs. Maybe 60% of those POCs are going to get junked later. But there is a sense of controlled optimism and controlled growth. Now, I'm saying that to Gen AI because that is generally the flavor right now in the industry. But if I had to expand that and look at it 10 levels above, are leaders today saying that we will grow, and then we will also, while growing, we will also start thinking about sustainability and things like that? Yes, they're thinking about it, but is it possible in a straight lace way? I don't know. Because if you think about it, I have been a startup founder, you're a startup founder as well. When you start a company, when you come up with an idea, what you want to see is how does that idea come to fruition. Do you think about the aftermath? Do you think about the things around it? No, you don't, because you want to see that idea come to life, right? So I think the same thing is going to happen. There will be ideas. There will be ideas that turn into concepts. Some of those concepts will be successful. So most of them may not be. But whatever ones are successful, leaders, once they start growing on that path, then they're going to have to think about, hey, now this new business model or new revenue model has come into scale. What are the guardrails that I put in place? What are the things that I make it sustainable with, right? These are all the aspects that will happen post facto. But I don't think it's easy to think about it while you're growing.